Hello, America to start with, and follow the link and you can see who's put this chart together because I've forgotten. St. Louis Fed chart, money stock in blue and industrial production in red. Money stock's quite an innocent little thing. It either is what it is or it isn't. Industrial production we generally want to be high. We want it good and pumping because industrial production is accepted to be good. If you notice, especially in the recession areas, the grey bars, these lines have reverse correlation. One goes up, the other one goes down, and Vicky Verka. So, presuming that, we have the blue going up, which is the M2 money stock, perfectly innocent, nothing of itself. So we can expect the industrial production to plummet down accordingly if all of these reverse correlations since 1995 are to be followed, and that of course would be in keeping with the double dipper. This is a paragraph, link 2, from the Financial Times, where you can see a video of Tracy Alloway telling you all about this. It's I won't read it. She shows you a chart of the Primex, which is the index. Let's say it's not totally right, but it's right enough. It's the index for CDOs on MBSs, but for prime mortgages in the United States. And there are now more sellers than there are buyers for that index. And the index is now heading down towards under 100, which means that what happened in subprime is starting to happen, maybe, for prime mortgages in the United States, which would be very bad indeed. Because as subprime came down below 100 and obviously went down to very small numbers, this Primex index always stayed around 120 and things like that, more buyers than sellers. But now there are more sellers than buyers. Bad news. Inside higher ed, the lecturer's filibuster is, let's read and see what it is. California involved here. Now the California lecturers, who make up nearly half of the system's undergraduate teachers, believe that they have used that bargaining power to score a rare coup. This is taken from the heart of the article. The University of California last week tentatively agreed to a deal with UCAFT, the union, that included a new provision barring the system and its campuses from creating online courses or programs that would result in a change to a term or condition of employment of any lecturer without first dealing with the union. Bob Samuels, the president of the union, says this effectively gives the union veto power over any online initiative that might endanger the jobs or work lives of its members. We feel that we could stop almost any online program through this contract, Samuels told Inside Higher Ed. Now, I've put this here because there will be many arguments in the future, the near future, about whether this is good or bad. Is this protecting some of the only decently remunerated jobs in America, or is it ruining in America and holding them back from advancement? You know, it's stopping progress. And it's going to be an argument that is going to be used politically. So anybody that gets into this argument should try and think that they are probably going to be used as political pawns. Baseline scenario. James Quack, who's been writing some horrible articles lately. I've put this in just because it's educational, and I hope it helps people that want to be educated to help with a bit of economics talk. In economics, scratched out, life put in there. In life, there's a basic conceptual distinction between a flow and a stock. A flow is something that occurs over some period of time, like water pouring from a faucet into a bathtub. A stock is something that exists at a specific moment of time, like water that is in the bathtub. You measure a flow over a period of time, e.g. gallons per minute. You measure a stock at a specific moment in time, e.g. gallons. For a business, the income statement, revenue and costs in a year, measure flows, while the balance sheet, assets and liabilities, measures stocks, a stock. That's why the income statement is dated for a year or a quarter, and the balance sheet is dated for a specific day. Everyone understands this. If you didn't, you would get confused between your salary and your bank account. Okay, I'll just leave it there. The rest of the article is certainly not worth reading, but it's quite interesting to have that in our minds about stocks and flows, because people like, say, Steve Keen is always on about stocks and flows, and that's just basically what they are. So we go to Money Supply blog on the Financial Times, and things go from bad to worse for the United Kingdom economy. Perhaps the least reported but most important aspect of last week's national accounts revisions is the apparent difference between the pre- and post-crisis trend growth rate. Now, this is another economist vocabulary type thing. But without the vocabulary, this is the chart of it. Basically, growth, the GDP growth, had a trend going up from 1997 on this chart, and the dotted line is obviously showing the trend of the actual GDP growth, and I think in the next paragraph we see what it was. But as we can see in the 2008, in the Great Recession, it's dropped down and is now 14% below the trend line. Now, economists look an awful lot into this sort of thing. And later in the article we read number 3. The whole thing's worth reading, very good. What is the near-term GDP forecast independent of these underlying structural issues? Things might be bad enough in the economy that short-term economic forecasts, which do not rely on an output gap or trend growth assumptions, that's what we have in the chart, the 14%, are heavily revised lower. If so, policy action to stimulate the economy, monetary or fiscal, are justifiable on the grounds that action is needed to stem a sudden lack of effective demand regardless of the murky underlying economic dynamics. So it does get tricky. We need these occasional inputs of what they're talking about. But basically, back to yesterday, justifiable on the grounds that action is needed to stem a sudden lack of effective demand. That's what we've got, demand lack in the economy. And just to show, number 4, what has caused such an apparent change in Britain's economic fortunes can be read if you follow the link, number 5. Over in banks in the Financial Times, EU banks face higher capital thresholds. Now, this is a very annoying article to me, but it might not be to you. It starts, European authorities plan to set a higher than expected capital threshold for the region's banks and give them 6 to 9 months to achieve that level or face government recapitalisations under the auspices of the Eurozone's 440 billion rescue fund, senior regulators said. Okay, where should I start? I don't know where to start with this without going on and on and on. Okay, it looks like what Merkel and Sarkozy have done this weekend when they met. Sarkozy didn't want Greece to take any more haircut than the 21% agreed. Merkel didn't want France to... Merkel wanted France and Germany to recapitalise their own banks. France wanted to use the EFSF. It looks like what they've done is Merkel has agreed to use the EFSF to recapitalise banks, and Sarkozy has agreed to a higher haircut on Greek defaults, right? Okay. Having that, then they said, well, we can't straight use the EFSF because, you can imagine the negotiations going on. We can't use the EFSF so straight away. Let's give them 6 months to recapitalise up to a certain level, let's say 7%. And they said, well, so it's going to be struggle to do it in 6 months. Let's say 9 months. And then the other party will say, well, if we're going to give them 9 months, let's put the capital ratio up to 9% then. And the other party says, well, we can't do that. And it's all bargaining, and it's all absolutely evident in that one paragraph. Another paragraph in the article, though, however, some members of the EBA board, that's the European Banking Authority, notably the German contingent, are understood to have dissented about the amount of capital talked about, and no firm decision has yet been taken, naturally. Analysts had previously expected banks to be told to raise capital levels to 6 or 7%. A final decision may not be taken until the EU finance ministers meet ahead of the key October the 23rd Kick It Down the Road European Leaders Summit. 6 or 7%, or what did it say in the first paragraph? It didn't, but I think they're talking of 8 or 9%. This is equity, the amount of equity that is balancing the assets, the lending, or how much equity is in a bank. A bank runs on, they're talking 6 or 7% equity. Most all of the rest is bond borrowing. Now, the big question that annoys me, and quite a few people that have got brains where I haven't, why are banks so different from Caterpillar or Johnson & Johnson? They would have equity at about 70% and bond borrowing at 30%. So where they can deal with equity at 70%, the banks are quibbling about 7%. What is so special about banks? And that goes on for hours. Right. Next, we've got, I'll read it and then I'll remember what it's about. I'm going to start going on and on too much about Europe. And if you're not interested, you might as well go away. But this I'm ladling on heavy and deep because this is what the European authorities have got to deal with. Heavy and deep problems. And that's why I'm doing it. Remember the way the EFSF will operate. This is actually a Guardian article. Niels Pratley, if I remember me right. It is not pre-funded, right? The EFSF is not pre-funded. They don't put money in there. So Slovakia, Germany et al. Don't have to write a large check on day one. Instead, the EFSF will go into the market to raise funds from investors by issuing bonds backed by guarantees given by member states. We've done this before. The difference is critical. Investors must be found. In other words, it's got to be floated onto the market. We need market confidence. But as M&G's Mike Riddell puts it, to put money into a vehicle with an ever-expanding mandate that lends money to European governments and banks at precisely the time when the market has decided that those governments and those banks are insolvent. So why are you going to invest in the EFSF if that's going to be decided what they're going to do with that money? And this is a quick chart which is vaguely interesting. You can see that the rates are generally coming down on sovereign borrowing. Black at the bottom is Germany's sovereign borrowing because the good countries are getting theirs cheaper and the dodgy ones are having to pay more. And that's obviously the bifurcation is causing the problems. So going up, it's Germany in black, Netherlands in orange, blue is France, then Austria in red, the EIB in green hiding behind the EFSF. So the EIB is the European Investment Bank and the EFSF is obviously lagging behind. They've got to put out more interest rate than the sovereigns. And the chances are if they announce that they're going to do dodgy things with the EFSF, that interest rate will go up even higher. And then does the thing actually make sense in the end is the big question. Going on. Trichet warns of systemic phase of the crisis. Jean-Claude Trichet warned that Europe's financial crisis had reached a systemic dimension as he unveiled steps by European supervisors to tackle dollar funding problems at large banks and clamp down on lending to household in foreign currencies, etc. I'll put that in to show ECB boss talking words like crisis of systemic dimension, heavy dude stuff. Just to overload this, alarm bells are being rung over Spain's ability to hit its public deficit targets. I'll go to the bottom paragraph. Angel Laborda of the Savings Bank Federation Funcas said the figures on overall borrowing needs of Spain's public administration meant the chances of bringing down the deficit from 9 to 6, the agreed amount, were slim, and they are very slim indeed. And of course, the more the recession bites, the more it will be impossible. Going back to the banks, and a chart from JP Morgan, banks' capital shortfall after the sovereign haircuts. The stress tests put in sovereign haircuts, and what's the shortfall? I think these are on the lower capital requirements. 87 for KBC, that's another Belgian bank. Then you've got problems at Commerzbank, Unicredit, which is Italy, SocGen, Société Générale in France, and Deutsche Bank. Problems. This is an unfortunate one. Ireland, if there's a double dip recession, their exports, which are their main way out of this problem, and they are fighting hard to get out of the problem, will dip. And just to show, construction activity, which used to be their thing, has been in negative territory since early 2007. It was clawing its way back up, but it's on its way down again now. Poor old Ireland. And if you want to understand, this is beautifully put together. The actual coloured chart, I've cut it and made it into one chart so we can see it all. Kate McKenzie at Alphaville, Financial Times, a systemic approach to the Eurozone CDO. Now you have to be slightly understanding about what a CDO, and going back to where we started, subprime, and the way they diced and sliced and made tranches out of them. And Credit Suisse have embarked on a more technical approach to our old friend the Eurozone CDO. They've used the 5-year CDS spreads to organise the tranches like this, just like a CDO. Greece's equity, down there in pink. Ireland and Portugal are junior mezzanine. These were all terms used in tranches of CDOs. Collateralised debt obligations. Ireland and Portugal junior mezz. Belgium, Italy and Spain are senior mezzanine. France, Finland, Netherlands, Austria are senior, and Germany is super senior. A class of its own due to its size and special status as issuer of risk-free bonds. It's all clever stuff. Right, finishing here. Financial Times. This is Jim O'Neill, Goldman Sachs, at the end of an article trying to sum things up by using the phrase unlimited. He's American, impressed by big things. In describing how far they would go to intervene to support the lower limit for the Swiss franc value, the Swiss National Bank has not had to spend much at all to achieve these goals, so far at least. The bazooka worked so far for Switzerland by adopting the same bold approach to direct liquidity provision for the European bond market, or possibly through leverage for the expanded European Financial Stability Facility, our favourite EFSF. The ECB could turn the current situation around. Longer term, steps towards genuine fiscal union, including the development of a true euro-denominated bond market, seems a sensible goal. But unless Europe's policymakers stop trying to muddle through, all these goals will be pointless. And that's Jim O'Neill. Just in case you don't know him, the writer is chairman of the Asset Management Division of Goldman Sachs and former chief economist at the investment bank. Brain on a stick. Brilliant stuff. But saying really that the ECB should get together and print large and just say, if in doubt, we'll just pay for everything. And at the bottom of that, we could see that the response put together in the FT, the response by Raoul Ruparel, who comes with, finally, this is the end of what he says, finally, let's not forget that, even following a solution to this crisis, a vast array of countries will be left with mismatched interest rates in the Eurozone, this is, an overvalued currency, maybe, and convoluted decision-making process, the political system. The problems in the Eurozone run much deeper than an additional liquidity can solve, he's criticising Jim O'Neill. Yes, Greece needs a restructure, banks need to be recapitalised, and if an intergovernmental democratic way can be found to top up the European Financial Stability Facility with more focus on banks, this should also be explored. Alas, this may not be enough to save the euro. Realism by Raoul there. And I just pulled it down to get the first comment on the open comment section on this article. Tree Power writes, the squid's losing money, Squid Goldman Sachs, print us some more, unlimited amounts of money, and it didn't get that.